You saved. You paid down the debt. You built the emergency fund. You started later than you wanted, but you started. You stopped making the impulsive purchases. You read the articles, made the spreadsheets, had the uncomfortable conversations with yourself about spending. You did the things that most people never bother to do. And yet, none of that changed how it feels, did it? There is something that sits quietly in the background of your financial life that doesn't match any of that. A feeling. Not panic, it's not that dramatic. Not despair. Just a low, persistent hum of wrongness. Like something is still off. Like the numbers say one thing and your body says another. Like you crossed a finish line and somehow still feel like you're running. You don't talk about it much, because what would you even say? I'm doing fine, but I feel like I'm not. That sounds ungrateful. That sounds irrational. And you are not irrational. You've proven that. So you ignore the feeling. You check the accounts again. You adjust a budget category. You set a new goal. And the feeling stays. Let's be clear about something before we go any further. You are not confused because you're doing it wrong. You are not anxious because you lack discipline or information. If anything, the opposite is true. You think carefully about your financial life. You reflect on it, take it seriously. And you've spent real time trying to understand not just the numbers, but your own behavior around money. That is not a small thing. Most people never get that far. And still, that feeling, that persistent gap between what you know you've accomplished and what you actually feel while living it, that's not a failure of effort. It's something else entirely. And it's something that careful, self-aware people are especially susceptible to, precisely because of how hard they work to get things right. This isn't about what you're doing wrong. It's about something much quieter. Something happening at a layer of your thinking that financial logic doesn't quite reach. That's what this is about.
Here's what's actually happening. You've been operating under an invisible assumption, one so deeply embedded that you've probably never examined it directly. The assumption is this: that once you behave correctly with money, you will feel correct about money. That the feelings will follow the actions. That doing the right things will eventually produce the right internal experience. It's a reasonable assumption. It's also wrong. Or at least it's incomplete in a way that costs you years. Because the feelings don't follow the actions. Not automatically. Not without something else happening first. What you've done, the saving, the investing, the discipline, those are changes in your behavior. But behavior lives on the surface. Underneath behavior is something older, something more stubborn. It's your financial identity. The story you carry, mostly unconsciously, about who you are in relation to money. What you deserve, what's realistic for you, where you actually belong in the financial landscape. And that identity was written long before you started making better decisions. It was written in childhood kitchens and overheard adult conversations, and the way money was talked about or not talked about in the home you grew up in. It was shaped by early experiences of scarcity or precarity or anxiety. Even if those experiences were brief, even if they were subtle, even if your life now looks nothing like that. The trap is that you can change your behavior entirely without touching that identity. You can do everything right on paper and still carry an internal self-concept that is anchored to an older version of your reality. An identity that still, quietly, believes you're the kind of person who doesn't quite have it together. The kind of person for whom security is always slightly out of reach. And when your identity says one thing and your bank account says another, the identity wins. Not because it's true,
but because it's older and it's yours.
This is called identity dissonance, and it works like this. You make a decision, a good one. You put money into savings instead of spending it. You resist the upgrade. You stay in the apartment that's a little too small because the math makes sense. And consciously, you feel proud of that. You should. It is a good decision. But beneath that pride, something else registers. The decision confirms a belief you didn't even know you were holding. The belief that you have to be careful, that you can't afford to relax, that real security, the kind you can feel, not just see, isn't something that applies to you yet, maybe not ever. So the careful decision reinforces the careful identity, and the careful identity keeps producing the feeling that carefulness is necessary, that you are not yet safe, that the ground beneath you is slightly less solid than it looks. This is the loop: thought, emotion, behavior, cycling back on itself, quietly, for years. You're not reinforcing financial stability, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who isn't stable yet. The thought is, I need to be responsible because things could go wrong. The emotion is a low-grade vigilance, a readiness for something to fall apart. The behavior is another responsible decision, and the cycle repeats. What makes this particularly invisible is that the behavior looks healthy from the outside. From the outside, and even to you, it looks like discipline. It looks like wisdom. You're not overspending. You're not in denial. You're doing everything right. But the emotional experience underneath is not the experience of someone who feels financially stable. It's the experience of someone who is managing a problem. And when you're always managing a problem, even a problem that's technically under control, you never feel like you're not in a problem. This is why the feeling persists regardless of the account balance, because the feeling was never about the balance, it was about identity. It was about who you understand yourself to be financially, at a level that logic and behavior cannot directly overwrite. And here's where it gets more uncomfortable. The smarter you are, the more effectively your mind protects this identity, because your mind is very good at finding evidence that confirms it. Every market fluctuation, every unexpected expense, every moment of uncertainty becomes proof that the vigilance was right, that relaxing would have been a mistake, that the anxiety is not irrational, it's accurate. But it's not accuracy, it's identity maintenance. Your mind is not reading the situation, it's defending a story, and that story was written so long ago that you no longer even recognize it as a story. It just feels like reality.
On this channel, we examine the psychological patterns that quietly shape how intelligent people experience their financial lives. Patterns that are usually invisible and almost always running in the background long before any decision gets made. If that kind of thinking is useful to you, you may want to stay close to this channel. This doesn't look dramatic in real life. That's what makes it so easy to miss. It looks like this. You check your investment account, and the balance is higher than it's ever been. You see the number, you register it intellectually, and then you close the app and feel roughly the same as you did before you opened it. Not relieved, not reassured, not satisfied, just the same. Maybe you think, well, it could always go down. Maybe you think, I should be putting more in. The moment of positive evidence passes through you without landing. It looks like this. Someone casually mentions what they spent on something, a trip, a renovation, a car, and your immediate internal response isn't neutral curiosity. It's something tighter, a quick, almost involuntary calculation. Are they being reckless, or are you falling behind? The thought comes fast, and you push it away, but it came, and it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like orientation, like you were trying to figure out where you stood. It looks like this.
You're at a dinner with people who earn roughly what you earn, living roughly how you live, and somehow you come home feeling financially exposed, like you said something that revealed you weren't as together as they are, or like you've been quietly keeping something afloat that everyone else has long since resolved. Nothing specific happened, nothing was said, but the feeling was there on the drive home. This is the reflective pause. Because if you're being honest right now, one of those scenarios was yours, maybe more than one, and you may have noticed that recognizing yourself in them didn't feel like relief, it felt like something quieter, the mild discomfort of being seen accurately. That discomfort is data, not about what you're doing wrong, about where the feeling actually lives.
The real cost of this pattern doesn't show up in any account statement. That's why it compounds so quietly. What accumulates over years is not debt. It is a specific kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of vigilance that never fully resolves, of a nervous system that has been in a low-grade state of financial alertness for so long that the alertness has become the baseline. You no longer notice it as anxiety. It's just how you feel about money. And none of this shows up in the numbers. The things that vigilance costs you are invisible to any spreadsheet. It costs you the full experience of milestones. There are moments in a financial life that are supposed to feel something. Paying off the last debt, crossing a savings threshold you once thought was impossible, sending a child to university without the panic you anticipated. These are real achievements, and if you look back at them honestly, many of them passed with a kind of muted acknowledgement, followed immediately by the next goal, the next number, the next thing to track. The arrival was barely experienced before the departure to the next destination. It costs you presence in your own life, because a mind that is perpetually doing background financial calculations is a mind that is partially somewhere else always, not dramatically, not visibly, but partially, at the dinner table, on the vacation you finally took, in the conversation with your partner about something that has nothing to do with money. There is a thread of your attention that never fully shows up because it's still running the numbers. It costs you a particular kind of ease in relationships, the ease of someone who doesn't quietly filter social experiences through financial comparison, who doesn't carry a faint, invisible tension into conversations about money or spending or what other people seem to have. That ease, the ease of someone whose financial identity actually matches their financial reality, is not indifference. It's just the absence of a weight you've been carrying so long you think it's part of you. And here is perhaps the most significant cost. The pattern tends to delay indefinitely the experience of having arrived. There is always a reason the current moment doesn't count as security. The emergency fund isn't large enough. The investment portfolio is too exposed. The income isn't stable enough or passive enough or diversified enough. The goalpost moves, not because you're greedy, but because the identity that generates the feeling of insecurity doesn't update when the external situation improves. So the feeling of not quite enough persists through every milestone, every achievement, every correct decision you make. And years pass like that. Not in crisis, not in failure, in competent, disciplined, quietly anxious financial management, month after month, with the feeling of security always positioned just slightly ahead of wherever you currently are. That is the cost. Not dramatic, not visible, but real and cumulative in ways that matter.
There are some things worth sitting with quietly, not as a quiz, not as a diagnosis, just as honest observation. When your financial situation improves in any measurable way, how long does that improvement actually register emotionally before the next concern takes its place? Not how long should it, how long does it?
When you imagine a version of yourself that feels genuinely secure about money, not perfect, not wealthy, just secure, does that person feel like you, or do they feel like a different kind of person? Someone with a different background, a different temperament, different starting circumstances? When someone asks you how you're doing financially, what happens just before you answer? Is there something that tightens slightly, even when the honest answer is fine? Even when the honest answer is better than fine? When you think about the responsible decisions you've made, the disciplined ones, do they feel like expressions of who you are, or do they feel like management strategies for a problem that hasn't fully resolved? These aren't trick questions, and there are no correct answers to perform. The only thing that matters is what you actually notice when you sit with them without immediately reaching for a response. Because the pattern this video is describing doesn't live in what you do, it lives in the distance between what you do and what you feel while doing it. And that distance is only visible if you're willing to look at it without immediately trying to close it.
There is something that changes, not through action, but through recognition. When you can observe the loop, when you can catch yourself doing the background calculation during a moment that has nothing to do with money, or feel the familiar muting of a financial milestone, or notice the tightening before a casual question about finances, something shifts. Not the behavior, not the circumstances, not the account balance. The relationship to the pattern shifts. Because you are no longer inside the loop, executing it automatically. You are, for a moment, outside it, watching it run. And that distance, however brief, is significant, because it reveals something the loop depends on concealing. The loop is not you. It is something you do, automatically, habitually, mostly unconsciously, but something you do, not something you are. Your financial identity, the one that keeps generating the feeling of not quite safe, not quite arrived, is not a fact about your personality. It is a learned orientation. It was built in response to real experiences, real environments, real information that you absorbed before you had any sophisticated way of processing it. It made sense then. It served a function then. It just hasn't been updated. And the reason it hasn't been updated is not that you're incapable of change. It's that no amount of correct behavior by itself reaches into the layer of the mind where the story is kept. You can act your way around an identity indefinitely without revising it. That's what makes this so persistent in people who are doing everything right. Awareness is not a solution. It is a precondition. You cannot intentionally update something you can't see. But once you can see it, once you can observe the loop running in real time with some degree of neutrality, you are at least in the position of someone who knows what they're actually working with. That is not a small thing.
You did do the right things. The discipline was real. The decisions were sound. The effort was genuine. None of that is diminished by the feeling that accompanied it. But the feeling is also real, and it is trying to tell you something. Not about your accounts, not about your habits, but about the story that has been running underneath all of it, quietly, automatically, for longer than you realize. You don't need to fix this immediately. That's part of the pattern. The urgency to resolve it, to convert this awareness into a plan, to turn even this moment of recognition into something productive, that impulse is the loop, running again. The same identity that generated the feeling will try to manage it away before it can actually be seen. So the invitation is smaller than that. The next time you notice the feeling, the low hum of wrongness that persists despite the evidence, try not to immediately explain it away or push it into another goal. Just notice it. Notice where it lives in you. Notice what thought comes just before it. That moment of noticing is worth more than most financial adjustments. If something in this landed,
If there's a version of this pattern you recognize in your own life, I'd be curious what it looks like for you. The comments are there if you want to put it into words.